one of which is the PPR strategy. Partial pre-rendering enables you to combine static and dynamic components together in the same route. It's pretty crazy, and it's completely new. During the build, Next.js pre-renders as much of the route as possible, and only if dynamic code is detected, like reading from the incoming request, you can wrap the relevant component with a React suspense boundary. The suspense boundary fallback will be included in the pre-rendered HTML. So Next.js here shows an example of an e-commerce store, where we have a navbar which is completely static or revalidated. Same thing for the product information. Static or revalidated in some kind of a time frame, like every 60 minutes, seconds, or whatever it is. But in general, it's static. But the cart and the recommended products can be completely dynamic. Only that part, while the rest can be static to use all the benefits that I mentioned so far, like speed, efficiency, better developer experience, and also SEO benefits that it offers. And I would highly recommend watching this 11-minute video by Delba, where she visually explains partial pre-rendering. These are some very nice graphics that allow you to fully understand how this is working. But for the time being, I'll show you how it works in a real example. Pink dots right here denote artificially delayed responses for demo purposes, like shipping estimates, which you can see right here, recommended products, and reviews. These are always going to be dynamic because they have to make a request to some outside source, such as a postal service, to know when it can get shipped. Same things for recommended products because some algorithm has to be ran to check out your preferences and shopping habits. And finally, there's the customer reviews, which are always going to be dynamic. So now check this out. If I reload, see how this loaded immediately. Because the product information doesn't really change that often and you have it right in front of you. Then this loads in 200 milliseconds and this one loads in 500 milliseconds. Pretty crazy stuff, right? You can choose what you want to show dynamically and what will be there immediately for the users, cached and coming from a CDN. Next.js's PPR really is the latest and greatest of rendering strategies out there, as it allows you to combine the best of both worlds. So now, let me teach you how to add it to your apps. First, head over to next-config.ts. And here, we'll add an experimental tag because it is experimental right now, but soon enough, it'll become stable. And here, you can say PPR and set it to incremental. We can also turn on some additional dev indicators, such as app ISR status is set to true, build activity is also set to true, and build activity position is set to bottom right. These will help us visualize what is happening with PPR. Next, back in the startup details page, we have to export const a new flag called experimental_PPR is equal to true. And now we can use Sanity's client API to perform incremental static regeneration or ISR to get the startup details. We can do that by fetching the post based on the provided ID. Const post is equal to await client dot fetch. We pass in the startup by ID query, and we pass in an object where we pass the ID as the first and only parameter. Finally, if there is no post, we can return a not found. This is coming directly from Next navigation. Else, we can return something else from the post now. For example, we can render a post.title. See how TypeScript immediately knows that we actually do have a title on the post. Going back to localhost and clicking on one of these posts opens up a 404. This page could not be found. Oh, that's happening because no post was returned, so we redirected to a 404. But why is that? Could it be that our query is good, but it actually cannot find a post under that ID? Similarly to what happened when we were trying to query it within Sanity Vision, let's try to console log it to see what we're getting back. I'll console log this ID right here, save it, and click on one of these posts right here. As you can see, we get the full ID, but at the end, we have this %sign character, even though in the original ID, it doesn't seem to be there. I also opened a second post that we created, and would you take a look? It ends with different numbers, but then it has the same %7d appended to it at the end. which makes me pretty sure that I already know what the problem is. Can you catch it? Try to debug it with me. When you click on the details of any one of these cards, it appends an additional character to the ID, as you can see right here. So, where's the issue? Let's try to pinpoint and centralize it. Is it in the details? Well, yes, most likely. So if we go to the code, and if we go to the startup card, take a look. I made a mistake. You most likely didn't have this mistake. You most likely properly wrote it. I hope you did. But I added an extra curly brace right at the end of this string. So if I remove it and click details, perfect. We get a title of each different document. Even though you might not have had this issue on your end, I hope this little debugging session was useful. But with that in mind, the fact that we're now getting a title means that we're successfully fetching post details from Sanity with the PPR strategy enabled. In the next lecture, we'll code out the UI of the startup details page, and I'll further explain which parts can we leave as static and which ones will make dynamic to utilize the full power of PPR. Great work so far. Let's get started with startup details page by creating a section right here at the top. This section will have a class name equal to pink_container. We've seen that before and know exactly what it does. I'll also give it a exclamation mark min-h 230 pixels, which will override it to a bit of a smaller value. There we go, that's looking good. Right within it, I'll create a p tag that'll have a class name equal to tag, and it'll show a formatted date. So let's call a format date function coming from our libutils and pass the post _created at property right within it. And there we go, October 14th, 2024. Next, let's move this h1 right within it, and we'll change the styles just a tiny bit by setting the class name to be equal to heading. There we go, that's already so much better. Right below it, let's create another p tag that'll have a class name equal to subheading, and it'll also have a max W of 5XL with an exclamation mark at the start. And that will render the post.description. There we go, looking good. Right below this section, we'll create another section, and this section will have a class name equal to section_container, within which we can render an img tag with a source equal to post.image. There we go, that's looking good. We can also have an alt tag of thumbnail and a class name equal to w-full, h-auto, and rounded-xl. Looking good. Right below it, let's create a div, and that div will have a class name equal to space-y-5, margin top of 10 to divide it a bit from the top, max W of 4XL, and a margin X of auto. And right within it, we can create another div to help us with positioning with a class name equal to flex between and a gap of 5 in between the elements. Within there, we can render a link, of course, only after we import it from next link, and give it an href of /user/post.author !_ID. So we're creating a link to point to the author details page, which we'll soon create. Let's also give this link a class name equal to flex, gap of 2, items-center, and a margin bottom of 3. Within it, we can render an image with a source of post.author.image with an alt tag equal to avatar, a width of 64, a height of 64, and a class name of rounded-full to make it a full avatar, and drop shadow LG. We have to import the image tag from Next.js, and if we save this now, you'll see a great looking profile photo. Right below this image, let's create a div within which we can have a p tag with a class name equal to text-20-medium, within which we can render the post.author.name, and we can also duplicate this, change the text to something like 16, and also give it text black of 300 with an exclamation mark, within which we can render at post.author.username. So we can show both the name and the username right below it. Of course, the author page doesn't yet exist, but it will soon. Let's go below this link and let's create another p tag that'll have a class name equal to category dash tag. So I think you know what it will render, the post.category. There we go, perfect. Now, right below this div, we can create an h3 that'll have a class name equal to text-30-bold, and it can say something like pitch details or startup details, if you will. And right below it, we can render the pitch details, which come in a markdown format. To parse and convert markdown into an HTML string, we need to install an additional package. It's this one right here called Markdown It. And it says it's a markdown parser done right, fast, and easy to extend. You can just install it by running npm install markdown-it, and then you can use it very simply. So let's do it together. I'll open up the terminal, clear it, and run npm install markdown-it. Once it gets installed, we can get the parsed markdown content right here at the top by saying const parsed content is equal to md, which we have to import at the top by saying import markdown it from markdown it. Then right here, we can define md is equal to markdown it. And finally, on this parsed content, we can say md.render post ? Pitch, or an empty string in case it doesn't exist. So this will properly parse the markdown content so we can display it as HTML. And you can see that markdown it is complaining a bit, saying that we don't have the necessary types for it. So if you hover over it, it's going to give you the command to install the type declarations for the library. So just copy it and paste it in the terminal. Then the warning will be gone and you'll have all the necessary types. Great. Now that we have this parsed content, we'll have to set it as HTML. So let's do that right here below this h3 by checking if we have access to the parsed content. If we do, we can render an HTML5 semantic article tag, which can be self-closing in this case. I think we should be good. And on it, we can use a dangerously set inner HTML property. Now, React normally escapes any HTML to prevent XSS attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, rendering the content as plain text. But when you want to insert raw HTML, like the parsed markdown, you must use dangerously set inner HTML to tell React that the content is safe and should be rendered as HTML. So right here, we can define __HTML to be equal to parsed content. We also need the second part of this ternary. And here we can say p tag with a class name of no result, which can say no details provided. If we save it, you can see pitch details, and we can see all the testing markdown that we have passed using the Sanity Studio markdown editor. We can style it further by giving this article a class name of prose. This will allow Tailwind CSS to automatically change a lot of different styles to make it more readable and to actually parse it. There we go. This is looking so much better. Let's give it a max W of 4XL, so it doesn't take the full width of the screen on larger devices. Font work sans to match our application. And let's give it a break-all, which will apply the word break property. Great. Now we can go below this div and we can create an HR, a horizontal rule with a class name equal to divider, to divide the pitch details from the next section. Later on, right here, we'll show editor selected startups, which are some recommended startups for us to check out since we checked out this current one we're viewing. So we can kind of continue checking out additional ones while staying on the app. So for now, I'll turn this into a to-do so we can implement it later on. But let's go below this section and let's create another very small but very, very important section. And that one will make the fact that we're using PPR on this page make sense. Because everything we have rendered so far is static content. Whatever the pitch details we have, the thumbnail, the title, we don't need to constantly dynamically refetch or revalidate. We're okay that sometimes this data is stale and can be changed later on. But we will implement an additional piece of this page that we need to update frequently, basically in real time. It'll be completely dynamic. So as you learned from the start of this video, whenever you want to make something dynamic in PPR, you have to wrap it in a suspense coming from React. And that's actually a React feature, allowing you to provide a fallback in case we cannot render something new, or something to show while that something new hasn't yet rendered or been fetched. So if we cannot yet fetch it, we can render a skeleton property coming from ShadCN. So let's go ahead and install it by running npx ShadCN add latest add skeleton. There we go. It has been added, and we can now import it right here at the top, coming from components UI skeleton. And suspense is of course coming from React, so make sure to properly import it. We can actually add it right here at the top. To this skeleton, we can also provide a class name equal to view-skeleton. And within the suspense, after you have given it a fallback, you can choose to add the code that will be rendered dynamically. So for that piece of code, let's actually create a new component. In the components folder, I'll create a new file called view.tsx. I'll run rafce, and I'll now render that component right here within the suspense by saying view, coming from add components /view. And to it, I'll just pass the ID equal to the ID. This is the ID of the post we're currently on. So what kind of view am I even talking about here? Well, if you check out the final version of the application, check out this little thing at the bottom right. I know it's super small, but once again, I really wanted to show you how we can make PPR truly shine. This piece of data will be rendered dynamically whenever it changes in real time, thanks to Sanity, of course, but the rest of the page will be completely static. Exactly as that Next.js example where they had an e-commerce store where we had the product details, which were rendered statically, but then some additional posts or views or whatever it was rendered dynamically. So now we can go into the view and we can develop the dynamic part of our PPR page. That's gonna look something like this. We can first destructure the ID from props and say that it's ID of a type string. Then we can return a div with a class name equal to view container, within which we can render a div that'll have a class name of absolute -top-2 and -right-2. Can you guess what will go into this container? Well, it'll be that little ping that you can see right here, this light, indicating to us that it is live. So to implement it, I'll actually create another component in the components folder, and I'll call it ping.tsx, run rafce, and I will import it right here within the div by saying ping and calling it as a self-closing component. Below this div, we'll render another p tag with a class name of view text, within which I'll render a span that'll have a class name of font-black that'll render the total number of views. So for now, let's simply render 100 as a static number and say views. If we go back to our application, you can see 100 views and then ping right here at the top right. That's good. All good things take time. So now we can dive into ping and we can implement that little pinging light by giving this div a class name of relative, within which we have another div with a class name is equal to absolute -left-4 and top-1, so we can properly position it, within which we have a span that has a class name of flex and size-11 pixels within square brackets, within which we have another span with a class name equal to absolute inline-flex h-full w-full animate-ping rounded-full bg primary and opacity of 75. There we go. You can kind of see it right now at the bottom right. And below this span, we'll have another span that'll have a class name is equal to relative inline-flex size dash 11 pixels, same as before, rounded dash full, and BG primary. So basically we'll have one that is always active, and then we'll have one that pings, indicating its live interactivity. Great, this is now looking good. Now we have to write a separate sanity query to get the total number of views for a post with the given ID. To do that, you already know the drill. We have to go into sanity queries, where we currently have 2. So we can create a third one by saying export const startup underscore views underscore query is equal to define query, to which we pass the actual query. This query will be a bit simpler. We'll say something like, give me everything where of a type double equal to startup, and if the underscore ID is equal to $ID, and give me only the first element, and only return the ID and the views. Pretty simple, right? Now we can copy this query, go back here, and say const in curly braces views, which we can rename to total views, is equal to await client coming from sanity dot with config, to which we'll pass use CDN is set to false. So you can also manually define whether you want to use CDN or not with inline configuration. Now let's turn this into async since we're using await right here. There we go. And finally, after the dot with config, we also have to add dot fetch. So which query are we fetching? We're fetching the startup views query, to which we have to pass params of ID. Now let's make sure to properly close this right here. Looks like I had a typo, and this is now looking so much better and it makes more sense. We also have to add the ID as a param. Perfect. And now we can get access to the total number of views and dynamically render it right here. Currently, we have only 1 views. We can do some additional parsing to remove the letter S in case it's a singular number. A quick trick is to just say views and then say colon. That way, views 1, views 2, views no matter how many, it's all good. That's if you want to be lazy. But I challenge you to create a function called format number that actually takes into consideration whether a number is singular or plural, or whether it needs an S at the end or not, and then adds it correspondingly. With that in mind, and considering the fact that we specified the useCDN to false, the number of views whenever it changes will automatically be reflected on this page. Later on, I'll also add a little to-do right here to modify or update the number of views whenever somebody sees this post. More on that soon. With that said, we have successfully implemented the dynamic part of the startup details page, and the static part has been implemented too, which leaves us with the completed startup details page. Of course, we have to still update the views and then show other relevant posts similar to this one. We'll do that soon, but for now, this is great. So next up, we'll tap into Sanity's write client functionalities, meaning being able to modify some data directly within our application. This will allow us to create new startups, but even sooner than that, it'll allow us to update the number of views so that we can see the full benefits of PPR. So far, we've implemented PPR, partial pre-rendering, on the startup details page, but we can't really see any difference yet, as everything seems static, as we're not updating any kind of data. To increase the number of views in our database, at the exact moment somebody visits the page, we'll have to set up a new Sanity write client that allows users to perform write operations. So far, we only performed read operations. Now, to set up a write client in Sanity, we need to generate a token with write permissions through the Sanity Manage website. So, visit your dashboard, navigate to the Sanity project you've created, head over to API, go to Tokens, and add a new API token. Specify the name, something like Create and Update Startups, and give it the editor access, the ability to write access to all datasets, and click Save. Copy the token info you were given, and head over to .env.local. There, you can add Sanity write token and make it equal to the token you just copied. Notice how this one doesn't have the next public. Well, that's because this is a more serious action, which not everybody should be able to perform, and it can only happen from the server side. Next.js will automatically reload all the envs as soon as this happens. Now head over to sanity/env.ts. That's this file right here. And below the project ID, also export const token and make it equal to process.env.sanity_write_token. Next, we have to create a new file under sanity lib. And as we have created client.ts, now we need to create a new file called write client.ts. To create it, we can copy what we have here in the client and paste it for the write client. At the top, as I have already mentioned, this code can only be run on the server. So we're going to import server only. All of the other things which we're importing are going to be here, such as the API version, dataset, project ID, and in this case, we also need to get the token. So we can say export const write client, create a new client with the project ID, dataset, API version, use CDN set to false, and finally, we also have to give it a token. We can also add one failsafe to say if there is no write client.config and then .token after that. In that case, we can throw a new error saying something like write token not found, just so we know what's wrong. And now that we have access to this write token, we can actually finally update the number of views. By going to the view component, we can remove this to do and say await write client dot, and we can call a dot patch on it. Patch is used for updates. We want to patch a document with this specific ID, and we want to set the number of views to be equal to total views plus 1. And we want to commit that action by saying .commit. And that's it. With this approach, these two requests will execute sequentially, and you won't see anything on the UI until they are executed. Instead, you'll see the skeleton. To avoid that, and to run this update view in the background while we see the rest of the results immediately, we can use the unstable after functionality, allowing you to schedule work to be executed after another response is finished. This is useful for tasks and other side effects that should not block the response, such as logging and analytics, or a perfect case, updating the number of views. It can be used in the server components, server actions, route handlers, and more. And it looks something like this. Import unstable after as after, and then you call it. In this case, we want to schedule the work after our response to getting views is done. We'll then update the views in the background without blocking the UI. To do that, we just have to do this. Import unstable after as after from next server, and then wrap this await into after, close it like this, and set that into its own async function. That is it. Now, if you go back to your application, you'll notice that unstable after must be explicitly enabled by setting the experimental.after to true in our next config. So let's head over to next config, and here, along with PPR, we can also set after to true. If you do that and reload, the error is gone and the number of views switched to 2. Check this out. I'll reload a couple more times. Check how great this is. The rest of the content isn't even changing, and it's here immediately. Doesn't feel like anything is happening. Like if I go back and if I go to this document, I mean, it is just super quick. The only part of the website that updates is this little part at the bottom right, which is the number of views. Super cool. I think I'll continue reloading it a few more times. But even at this point, it still may not be clear that this is PPR, right? So I will actually demonstrate it to you. I'll open up Sanity Studio on the right side and keep looking at the project details on the left. I'll head over to startups and I'll find this last startup that I updated. We can see the number of views is 22. Now I'm gonna change the title of this startup in Sanity Studio and reload the page. check this out. I'll change it to something like new JSMastery.pro platform. Yep, that's a cool new startup we're working on. So let me click publish. And even if I reload, well, it changed immediately. It's possible that I hit just the right reload time. But if I change it again to something like new JS Mastery Pro platform and click publish, if I reload, well, it changed immediately. Looks like the news about the new upcoming platform can't wait to get leaked. But let's see why is that, because right now it seems that everything is live and not cached at all. We are fetching the number of views right here using the client, and we specifically set the use CDN false. That's okay. But what about these startup details? So if we go to startup details, here we're using the regular client, and this client, oh, it has a use CDN set to false. When we were testing something, we set it back to false just to show it. But for now, I can set it to true, so it'll actually cache things. So now, if I go back and change this to something like brand new JS Mastery Pro platform and click publish, and then reload here, you can notice that this will not actually update for another 60 seconds. That's because the data is cached, it's coming from a CDN, the views are indeed updating, the title stays the same, and that, my friends, is PPR for you. Hopefully now you understand how this is working behind the scenes. The startup details use ISR, incremental static regeneration, which revalidates the page every 60 seconds. So any change made in Stagnicity Studio or editing the database will make the changes appear on the website once the cache is refreshed. Meanwhile, views use SSR, server-side rendering, providing fresh data with each user request. So if I reload, 60 seconds have passed, we get the new data, and now it's going to be cached until it changes. Perfect. That was a good one. Now you truly understand how to use PPR. Next, we will revisit the author authentication flow. So we not only log in using Google OAuth, but we actually create a real author in our database that will then be capable of creating new startups directly within the YC Directory app. Let's do that next. I've shown this graph to you before, right? And basically what it says is, depending if there is a session or not, we have to make sure that the user that is authenticated also is created as an author within our database. And if they're not, we need to create one in their name. So to do that, we'll have to create a sanity query to see whether an author with a specific GitHub ID exists. Let's head over to queries and let's create a new query by saying export const author by GitHub ID query is equal to define query. And we can say something along the lines of give me everything where underscore type is double equal to author and the ID of the author is equal to $ID. Then give me only the first element that matches. And for that first element, return the following things: an underscore ID, the ID, name, username, email, image, and bio. Now let's go over to auth.ts. And we have to write some callbacks. These are functions that are executed after successful authentication by next auth. In this graph, that callback would be somewhere right here where we're authenticating and when we get the successful information about the user. Currently, we just create a session and return it. But now, whenever we create a session, we also want to do this check that we just created the query for. So alongside providers, create callbacks, which is an object, and create a first callback, async sign in, to check whether a user already exists in our database or not, and then depending on that, create it. Right here, we get access to the newly authenticated user, their account, and their profile. We can check whether this is an already existing user by saying const existing user is equal to await client.fetch author by GitHub ID query, to which we pass params as ID. And of course, this client has to come from Sanity. Specifically, this ID is going to be referring to the profile !ID coming from GitHub OAuth. Now we can check if there is no existing user, then we can use Sanity write client to create a new user document or new author document by saying await write client, which we have to import from Sanity, dot create, where the type is equal to author, ID is set to profile !ID, name is set to user !name, username is set to profile !login, email is set to user !email, image is set to user !image, and bio is set to profile !bio, or an empty string if it doesn't exist. Now you can notice how I had to actually repeat user and profile many times. What would have been better is to simply extract information from this user or profile by destructuring it. So we can destructure from user the name, the email, and the image. And from profile, we can destructure what? ID, login, and bio. Now if we do that, we can remove all instances where we mention those things, and we can just refer to those things themselves. And if you have the same name of the key and the value, that means that you can just refer to it like this. Without specifying the name, it's just like this. But for username, it's going to be login, so we have to specify it still. Still much cleaner than it used to be. Finally, we can go below this if statement and then return true to continue the sign-in process. After a successful sign-in, we'll need to create an author ID from Sanity to use it for our profile or when creating a new startup. So let's modify the default JWT token and add the author ID to it. We can do that by creating a second callback right here, right below the async sign-in. We can create async JWT, where we get the token, the account, and the profile. There, we can check if account exists, and if profile exists, then we can get the user from Sanity by saying const user is equal to await client.fetch author by GitHub ID query, where we specify the ID to be equal to profile !ID. Oh, and I just noticed above we destructured the ID from profile, so we don't have to explicitly mention it here. We can just say ID. Now we can extend this ID with the user ID by saying token.id is equal to user._ID. And finally, we can exit out of that if and return the token. This will allow us to connect a specific GitHub user with a Sanity author that can then create a startup. Finally, in order to use the ID, we need to create a third callback function called session, where we get access to a session and a token, and we need to pass the profile ID from the token to the session by saying object.assign session, where we set the ID to be equal to token.id, and then we return the modified session. Great. Now we can go to any page. For example, we can go to our homepage, and here we can extract a session. And from it, we can get the Sanity ID of the author for that user. So let's do it by saying const session is equal to await auth coming from @/auth. And if you try to console.log session.id, you'll see that TypeScript will complain a bit, saying that session is possibly null. We can easily fix that by creating a new file right here in the root of our directory and call it next-auth or next-auth.d.ts. Within it, we can declare a new TypeScript module called next-auth, which will have two interfaces. Interface session, that'll have an ID of string, and it'll also have an interface JWT, which will have an ID of string as well. If you do that, the session now knows that it has an ID. So let's give it a shot. Now, if you go back to the home page, you'll notice that the only thing you have to do to get rid of this warning is to add a question mark right here. And you might have noticed that on my screen, there was an error right there 5 seconds ago, but now there's no error. Well, sometimes Next.js will throw some random errors as I'm still working on the experimental version of Next.js. So just so you know, if something weird is happening for you too, and you cannot find where the error is originating from, just try to reload your terminal and then run it one more time. It might help just to fix things, turn it off and then turn it on again type of situation. But with that in mind, if we do that and you reload on the homepage, you should see a console log for this session. Initially, the console log should be undefined, and we can see undefined right here. That's because we were left logged in before we created all the functionality to create a new ID to hook it up with the author. So to fix that, let's log out and let's log in one more time. And there you'll see a server error, problem with server configuration. If you open up the terminal, you'll see that it's coming from auth, and specifically it's complaining about not being able to find the _ID. So we might need to add a question mark right here, saying that sometimes the user might not be there. But why would it not be there in the first place? Let's check our query to be sure. We are trying to fetch the author by GitHub ID query by defining the query that gets everything of a type author and the ID is equal to $ID, where we get the first element. And then we return all of these properties for it. This is looking good to me. So let's give it one more shot. But before we do, you have to make sure that the author hasn't been generated. Or if it has, we'll have to clear it by deleting it. So now if we try to log in one more time, it's actually asking us whether we want to authorize it, which is great. So let me authorize my user. We're getting redirected, which is good. We get the same information right here at the top as before, but this time, if you go to Sanity Studio to authors, you'll be able to find a new user with complete OAuth data populated, such as the name, username, email, image, and the bio coming directly from GitHub. But a bigger question is, can we see that session ID in our console log? And for the time being, the answer is no. It is undefined. So let's debug it further. We're not getting the result we want. We create a new user on sign-in, and that user indeed gets created in the database. But if we try to read that value within the JWT, it returns undefined, even though the user has been created successfully in Sanity Studio. And even though we've had an issue with this optional chaining operator, that's not to blame. Even adding some additional checks, like if no user, then do something else, no, that wouldn't fix it. This issue is rooted deeply in how Sanity and more importantly, Next.js truly work behind the scenes, specifically their caching mechanisms. When we first created a new user, after confirming they didn't exist, Sanity successfully added the user. However, when we immediately attempted to retrieve that user within 60 seconds of creation, the query didn't return any results. This is because the read query was made too soon after the user creation, and Sanity's and Next.js's cache hadn't yet been updated. This is a common challenge when working with frameworks or libraries that cache data. And if you're not familiar with how and when caching occurs, it can lead to confusion and frustration when queries don't return the expected results and you know them for a fact that they're there. Without a proper understanding of cache, you might find yourself stuck and discouraged. This is why learning about cache management is crucial. You cannot say you know Next.js until you can for a fact know exactly how its caching mechanism works. And within the Ultimate Next.js course, we dive deep into how caching works, because I know how big of a problem it was for me the developers that work alongside me on all of these projects and all the other developers out there, which are simply saying that Next.js obscures and abstracts everything and just doesn't work. Well, it's not that it doesn't work. It's that they don't understand it yet. So if you're having trouble understanding Cache and you want to dive deeper into its inner workings, pause this video and check out the Ultimate Next.js course. Once you do that, let's go ahead and fix this issue. Back in our callbacks, we have to add use CDN false to both sign in and JWT callbacks. So here, where we're calling for existing user, we can say client dot with config, where we can pass the use CDN is set to false, and then call a dot fetch on it. Similarly, we can pass it when fetching the user right here, client dot with config, where we pass in the use CDN false, and only then do we fetch. If we now save this, close everything because we're expecting it to work, go back to Sanity and delete the existing user, log out, and give it one final shot. Let's see what we come up with. And before I log in, I'll make sure to clear the cache. I'll do it right here, clear cache and clear cookies and all that good stuff. You can also do it via inspect element by going to app and cache. Finally, let's log in. Okay, it automatically logged us in, which is great. The Sanity user has been created with all of its great OAuth GitHub data. That's great. But now for the moment of truth. Do we have the session ID within our terminal? And the answer is yes. Here it is. If you didn't know about Next.js caching, you can spend hours on issues just like this because you can see the data. For a fact, it is here, but your Next.js is telling you that it's not. No, it's not that. Next.js is just trying to make sure that your app is as efficient and as optimized as possible. But it's up to you to control the beast. So once again, if this is still a bit unclear and you want a deep under the hood dive into Next.js's inner workings, check out the Ultimate Next.js course. More than 4,000 developers have learned from it so far and love it. And I'll always continue updating it with the latest versions of Next.js. The link will of course be in the description. But with that said, even by watching this video, you might already understand some of the intricacies of caching. Thankfully, we have fixed this issue and we are ready to proceed. In the next chapter, we'll focus on creating the Create Startup page, allowing us to create new startups directly from YC Directory app, not necessarily needing to go to Sanity Studio. To start creating the Create Startup page, we have to create a new route in our application. For that, we'll go to App, Root, and then within Startup, we'll create a new folder called Create. And within the Create folder, we'll create a new file called page.tsx. You know the drill. I'll run RAFCE in there to quickly spin up a simple React functional component, and then I'll head over to Create, which will bring me to the page that we just created. Within here, I'll turn this div into an empty React fragment, and within it, I'll create a new section. This section will have a class name equal to pink_container and min-h in square brackets 230 pixels. Within it, we can create a new h1 and give it a class name equal to heading. And within it, say submit your startup pitch. There we go. That's looking better. Or we can say submit your startup. Now, right below it, we want to have a new component, which is going to be a form. So let's go ahead and create that form by creating a new component in the components folder, which is going to be called startup form.tsx. Run RAFCE, and then import this form right below the section as a self-closing component. Startup form. There we go. And of course, make sure to properly import it. Perfect. There we go. It's looking good. And we only want to be able to visit this page if we are logged in. So let's add one more failsafe by saying const session is equal to await auth coming from next auth like this. We have to turn this into async. And then we can make a check and say if there is no session, then we can redirect, and this redirect will be imported from next navigation. And it's going to point to just home /. Perfect. So now if somebody's unauthenticated and they try to manually go to Startup Create, it'll actually just bump them up to the home page because they can view but not create different startups. Great. So now let's dive into the startup form and let's start implementing it. Our form will use quite a few different ShadCN components, so let's go ahead and install them one by one. We can do that by running npx ShadCN, add latest, add, and we can add the input, the text area, the toast component, which is going to be for a little alert once we submit or once we have an error. And we'll add other ones as we go if we remember to add something else as well. Now we can develop the UI of the form. Let's start by turning this entire div into a form component like this. This form will have an action, which for now I'll set to be an empty callback function. Let's also give it a class name equal to startup-form. And you notice that as soon as we define some kind of an action, it's going to ask us to turn this into a client component. So let's actually add use client right here at the top. Right within the form, we'll have a div, and we'll use that div just for structuring our elements. Within the div, we'll have a label with an HTML4 property equal to title. So this will be a label for the title with a class name of startup-form_label. And it's going to say title. Right below the label, I'll render an input, which is going to come directly from ShadCN, meaning add components UI input, like this. It's going to be a self-closing component that'll have an ID equal to title, a name equal to title, a class name equal to startup-form_input. It'll be required, and it'll have a placeholder equal to startup title. There we go. That's looking good. Right below it, we can check whether we have any errors on our form. So let's create a new use state right here, use state snippet, which we need to import from React. And we'll say const errors and set errors is equal to use state at the start equal to just an empty object. So now if we have any errors, so if errors.title exist, then we'll render a p tag with a class name equal to startup-form_error, and it'll render errors.title. Perfect. Right now, our TypeScript is not sure whether title exists on this errors object. So what we can do is specify the type of this use state right here before the opening parenthesis, and we can set it as record string. So then it'll know that it contains different strings within this object. Now this is the field for the title, and we might want to replicate this for other fields as well. We want to do it for the description, we want to do it for the category, image link, and then the pitch itself will be the actual markdown. But for now, let's duplicate this entire div at least 3 times. So I'll copy this, 1, 2, 3. There we go. Let's divide them a bit with some space. And the second one will have the HTML4 description, and it'll say description. The input itself will actually be a text area. So let's import it from components text area. The ID and the name will of course be description. Instead of startup form input, it'll be startup form text area. Required and placeholder can be something like startup description. There we go. For the errors, you know the drill. It's going to be errors.description. And at the end, we will render the errors.description as well. Great. 2 inputs done, 2 more to go. Below description, we'll render a label HTML4 category. Startup form label, that's going to say category. The input for that category will be category. The name will be category as well. And we'll say something like startup category. We can give some examples so that they know what they have to enter, like tech, health, education, and so on. And we'll render errors.category. and errors.category here as well. And after that, we'll have our image link. So let's render the HTML4 link and say image URL, change the ID to link, the name to link as well, and we can say something like startup image URL. And finally, we'll render the errors.link and errors.link right here as well. And we have 4 different inputs. Great. Now below these, we'll need to have a pitch. And this will be the actual markdown, which will give us a lot of different capabilities so we can further optimize and style how we want to portray the pitch of our startup. You can see it in real time, how it looks like. You can enter different code blocks, and you can even enter inline images, which is pretty cool. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you want to present your startup. So to create this markdown component, we'll use UIW React MD Editor, which is a simple markdown editor with preview implemented with React.js and TypeScript. Let's go ahead and install it together by running npm i add UIW/react-md-editor. And here we can see how it can be used. We can import it right here at the top of the file. We need to define its state or the value. In this case, I'll rename it from value to pitch and set pitch. That's going to be use state. And finally, we'll be able to render it like so. So let's scroll a bit down and let's actually duplicate the entire div one final time for this pitch element. But this time, we'll give this div a data color mode and set it to light. So it always must be light. Give it HTML4 pitch, change this to pitch. We'll remove this input, and instead of the input, we'll use this MD editor that we have here. We can change the value to pitch and set the on change to set pitch. And for the errors, that's going to be errors.pitch as well as errors.pitch right here. In this case, I believe we have to set it as a callback function that gets access to the value, and then we can call the value as string, just to make sure that TypeScript is happy in this case. There we go. Now we're good. So if you go back to the create page and reload, you should be able to see a very simplistic but nice looking markdown editor, which has the preview mode enabled so you can see exactly what you're doing in real time. Now let's style it further and give it additional features. We can give it an ID equal to pitch. We can also give it a preview equal to edit, a height of about 300 pixels to give it some more space. We can give it a style of border radius of 20 to make it fit along our other elements better, and an overflow of hidden. There we go. Now it's a bit more organic. We can give it a text area props. Specifically, change a placeholder to be briefly describe your idea and what problem it solves. And we can also give it a preview options, which is an object where we can set a this allowed elements, and we can disallow the styling. So we're only going to keep the base markdown properties. So if we reload and remove this hello world, you can see that it says briefly describe your idea and what problem it solves. Finally, at the bottom, below this div, let's render a button coming from components UI button. Let's give it a type is equal to submit, as it'll submit the entire form, and a class name equal to startup-form_btn. There we go. Now, when submitting this form, it'll take some time. It won't be an instantaneous action. So let's create a field, const is pending, which for now I'll set it to false. Later on, we'll extract this value dynamically to know whether we're submitting the form or not. I'll also remove this hello world from the pitch so we have a clean and empty slate. So going back to the button, we can now make it disabled in case it is currently pending, meaning something is happening. Also, if it is pending, we'll change what it says. It'll say submitting ... else it'll say submit your startup or your pitch. And let's also render a send icon right here, which will have a class name equal to size-6 and margin left of 2. And we can also give it a text-white, so the contrast is a bit better. There we go. Let's see why this startup form is complaining. It is saying that we have multiple default exports. Let's see if that really is the case. It seems to me like we only have one. If I close the file and then reopen it, looks like the error is gone. Great. And with that, the UI of our form is looking great. So now we can focus on submitting the form. And we'll submit it using React's latest useActionState hook, a hook that allows you to update the state based on the result of a form action. It is a hook that simplifies the process of managing form states and form submissions. You don't have to write too many use states. It is designed to work seamlessly with server actions, allowing you to update component state based on the result of the form action. It even exposes a special isPending state that can be used to show a loading indicator while the action is being executed. And this useActionState hook is even better, and it's aimed to replace the React DOM's useFormState hook, as it caused some confusion and limitations. So this new hook fixes those issues by renaming useFormState to useActionState. It adds an additional pending state, and it moves the hook to the React package. Overall, a very good update in my opinion. So let's explore it in a bit more detail. We import useActionState hook from React, and you use it like you would typical useState. But this time, instead of simply saying useState and then getting the value and the setter, in this case, you're getting the current state of the form as state. You're getting dispatch, which is the action that we trigger to dispatch or trigger the form, meaning update. And then we get isPending, which is a Boolean indicating whether the action is currently pending. To this hook, you also provide the action, which is a function that is triggered when the form submit. You can think of this as handle submit. You get the initial state of the form, and then an optional permalink containing the unique page URL that the form modifies. So with that in mind, let's actually add the useActionState hook to the code. We can do that right here at the top. I'll remove this isPending, and I'll say const. We can get the state, the form action, and the isPending state by saying is equal to useActionState, which you call as a function. Of course, we have to import this useActionState, as we learned, directly from React. So we can get it right here. To it, we need to provide the actual action that'll happen once we submit the form. So let's create it. Const handle form submit is an arrow function, which we can call right here, handle form submit. That's the action. And we can also pass the initial state of the form, which can be set to an error, which is set to an empty string, as well as a status, which can be set to initial, like this. We can also declare this handle form right here above, so we can use it here. And we have to fix the typo in the error right here. We'll soon look into this TypeScript warning, but before that, let's focus on the validation of the form. For validation, we'll use Zod. Zod is a simple TypeScript-first schema validation with static type inference. And to implement it, you can create a new file in our lib folder. That's going to be right here. And let's call it validation.ts. Within it, you can say export const form schema is equal to z.object, and then you pass in all of the properties that you want your inputs to have. And of course, we have to import z from Zod. So which kind of fields do we have? Well, we have a title right here. So we can set that title to be a z.string with a min, so that min of 3 characters, and that max of about, let's do 100 characters. Let's add a description, z.string.min, let's do something like 20 and 500, so that's going to be a bit longer. Let's do a category, which can be set to a z.string as well, with a min 3 and max 20. Let's add a link, which is going to be a z.string, dot URL dot refine, where we have a callback function where you get the actual URL that the user submitted, and then you can do additional checks on it. You can open up a new try and catch block, which is going to look something like this. And we have to ensure that the URL provided is an actually valid image URL. So we can say const res is equal to await fetch.url with a method being set to head. So we're not fetching the actual contents, the image, we're just fetching the head to get access to its content type. So we can say const content type is equal to res.headers.get content-type. Once we get it, we can check if content type dot starts with image /, because it can be image PNG, JPEG, and so on. If it does, we'll return true, else we'll return false. And in the catch, we'll also just return false because something went wrong. So we're doing some more complex validation to check whether the URL is correct. And we can make this function async because we're using await right here. And it's saying that this if statement can be simplified. Sure it can. We can just return this because this function starts with, by itself, returns true or false. So check this out. The same if statement can be written just like this. If it starts with, it'll return true, else it'll return false. Finally, below the link, we have the pitch, which is going to be a z.string of .min, 10 characters, and .max about, let's think about it. Well, we don't even have to provide a max on that one. It can be much longer. So now we have our form schema, which we're exporting, and we can use it back in the startup form. So let's dive into the handle form submit further by first making it accept a previous state of the form, which is going to be of a type any, and form data of a type form data. Then we can open up a new try and catch blocks. If there's an error, we can return that error, and we can also give it finally. Finally happens either way. So which code you want to run when either it fails or it succeeds. So let's focus on the try first. We can get access to the form values by saying const form values is equal to an object, where we can specify how can our form data look like. We'll get the title by saying form data.get title, and we can say as string just to make sure that TypeScript is happy. Next, we can do a description and set it to be equal to form data.get description as a string. We can repeat the same thing for the category, and we can repeat the same thing for the link. Link is form data.get link as string. And finally, we'll just set the pitch like this because we don't need to get it from the form as we're managing it as a separate individual state. Now that we have the form values, we want to validate those values by saying await form schema, which we just created, which we're importing from validation, dot parse async form values. Okay, so we want to take the form values and we want to compare them with the form schema to see if they match. If they do, we can proceed by saying const result is equal to await, and here we can call a new mutation called create idea, which right now doesn't exist, to which we can pass the pref state, the form data, and the pitch. For now, I will comment it out. And right below it, we'll want to console log the result, just to see how well it works. Since we're using await here, we have to turn this into async. And you can see that now TypeScript is not complaining about the initial state, but rather the use action state. It'll fix once we finish working on the handle form submit. But for now, we want to test out whether we actually get all of the necessary values from the form when we submit it. So let's actually console log the form values and save it. We can give it a shot by filling all of these values. We'll have to sometimes use longer values because we do have some validation put in place. I'll enter test right here. And actually I'll enter https://test.com to see whether this will succeed. And we have some fake pitch. So let's click submit. It's submitting. Okay, check this out. It cleared the form and said, please check your input and try again. Pretty cool. We failed on the description, and we failed because the URL wasn't a valid image. This was a pretty cool validation, to be honest, what we did for the image. You can completely refine your validation and you can do some more complex checking, like the one we're doing here, by checking whether this is an image or not. So now let's try to fill this properly by entering a few more characters here, entering a category, and I'll find some image URL online, such as by going to the deployed website and picking one from here. Let me go with this one right here, copy image address, and I can paste it. And I'll enter just a test for the pitch right now, and I'll make it a bit larger. There we go. I'll bold it and give it a horizontal rule and one horizontal rule at the top. Okay, let's submit our pitch. Submitting. Success. Your idea has been created successfully. Oh, this was not what we were supposed to take a look at. I mean, I mistakenly submitted the form on the finished version of the YC Directory app, not the localhost 3000. So let's actually test it here. But before that, let's actually validate our inputs. We can do that by going into the catch right here and checking if error is an instance of z.zod error, like this. And we have to import z coming from Zod. There we go. Now this will allow us to check for the errors. If it is an instance of that, we then want to get access to specific field errors by setting that equal to error.flatten. So we'll flatten them all in a single array and say .field errors. Then we want to set errors to be equal to field errors as unknown as record that'll have a string and string. So this is just for TypeScript to be happy. And then we can return a previous state and modify the error to say validation failed with a status equal to error, all uppercased, like this. So now we're properly throwing errors. If it's some other kind of error, so not an instance of error right here, then we can just return the previous state, the error saying something like an unexpected error has occurred, and then we can set the status to be set to error. Great. So now we're handling the catch, and I don't even think we'll need the finally, so I'll remove it for now. So now we can check whether the validation actually works. I'll enter some things right here, category, click submit. Okay, we have to add a URL. And if we click submit, nothing really happens. It just clears the entire form. Oh, and I think I know why that is. This function is never actually getting called, because if you check the action of the form, we're not actually passing the form action, which is the handle form submit. So what we need to do is pass the form action right here as the action. That way, when we submit the form, this handle submit function will actually be ran. So let's one more time try to submit it with form action like this. And let's click submit. It's submitting, and there we go. Now we get invalid URL input. Perfect. That means that the validation is actually working. In case something goes wrong, we can also show a ShadCN toast. That'll be a little alert component saying that something went wrong. To make that happen, let's go to our layout. And this will be the layout not within the root, but the general layout. This one right here. And there, right below the children, we can add the toaster component coming from components UI toaster. And now back in the startup form, we can render a specific toast by first of all getting access to it at the top. Const toast is equal to use toast, which we have to import from hooks use toast. And now we can trigger it at different point of our application, such as when there is an error. When we set the errors, we also want to show a toast that'll have a title equal to error. It'll also have a description, something like, please check your inputs and try again. and we'll have a variant of destructive, which means that it'll be a red error. We can also copy it and duplicate it right here below for an unexpected error so that it can execute before the return. Here, we can just say an unexpected error has occurred. Great. Finally, we'll also do another toast if everything goes right. So right here, below the console log of success, we can say if result.status is triple equal to success, all uppercased, then we can show a toast that's going to say success with a description equal to your startup pitch has been created successfully. And below that, once that happens, we actually want to reroute to that startup details page. So let's import the user router right here at the top by saying const router is equal to use router coming from next navigation. And then right here below, we can say router.push pointing to /startup/result.id, because that's going to be the ID of our new startup. That's going to be within if result is success. So let's put it here. And finally, we'll just return result to know that everything went right. But for now, we want to comment this out because we don't yet have a function, a mutation that'll actually create the idea. For now, we just want to see whether we get up to this point of the application or we actually get access to the form values the user is trying to submit. And I have to comment this part out. So now that we have the toaster and everything, let's give it a shot. I'll try to make it fail one more time by providing fake info and clicking submit. Yeah, we can see the description fails, the image URL fails, and the string must contain at least 10 characters fails as well. So let's now fix this. I'll take in some actual titles and descriptions like SkillForge, a platform that uses AI to create custom learning paths for individuals based on their goals. I'll also take a real image URL. Category can be something like EdTech, educational technology. And for pitch details, I will also take some prettier looking markdown. We can see how that looks like right here. Let's make sure to properly bold it. There we go. This is looking better. So let's click submit now. And as you can see, we got a new console log in the startup form that gave us all the information that we just filled in, which means that it's properly getting through. We have a category, description, link, pitch, and a title, everything needed to actually submit a startup, which means we are ready to take this form data and pass it into a new server action called create idea, which will submit that startup. And we'll do that in the next lesson. But for now, let's sum up what we've learned in this one. You'll learn how to use the newest use action state hook that allows you to update the state of the form based on the result of a form action. It returns the state, the form action, and the is pending state, and to it, you have to pass the submit handler, the initial state, and another optional parameter. But as with anything in life, it has its good and bad sides. Lee Robb, one of the public developers at Vercel, who is teaching about React, Next.js, and the web, shared his views on the use action state, the good, the bad, and the unknown. React 19 is making data mutations easier. You can call an action on the client or server and have built-in hooks for pending states, handling errors, optimistic updates, and more. You're able to write less user code, a lot of which was previously boilerplate, and hopefully can create better UIs with these abstractions. The good being that one of the hooks you can call is called use action state. And if you're using the Next.js app router, you might have seen the use form state, but now that is the updated version of that, as we've learned. Overall, the hook works well, as intended, and definitely contains less code than you would typically need for a form. But there are also some downsides, like it feels like it's fighting TypeScript often. When you move from calling a form directly to using use action state, this changes the function signature, export async function save action, to export async function save action with the previous state and the new form data. Not a big deal, right? But something that is a bit of a bigger deal, especially for me, is that I haven't yet figured out the most common use cases regarding the previous state. But one of the bigger downsides for me is that server actions will automatically reset the form on submission, which is nice sometimes, but not always what you want. Which is what you were able to see in our case. As soon as we submitted, it actually cleared all the fields. Exactly what he says next. If there's an error in your action and you return some object, you ideally don't want to blow away the client-side values in your form. Instead, you want to retain those values and maybe show an error message under the input. Since the default behavior is to reset the form, you have to save all of the form input values into useAction state and then derive those values from that state in the component. So with that in mind, I'm sure that the useAction state will evolve and grow, but for the time being, it is definitely a welcomed improvement in how we're dealing with forms in the newest versions of React and Next.js. To submit our startup, we'll have to do it through a mutation through a server action. Server actions can be defined by using React's useServer directive. You can place them at the top of an async function or mark the entire file as useServer, something like this, where you can have multiple server actions in a single file. Understanding server actions is still incredibly relevant in all new versions of Next.js. And if you don't really know what a server action is, I go into much more depth about them in this video, which I'll link below, teaching you how to develop server-side applications with server actions and even teaching you how to build a simple application using them. So pause this video and watch this first if you don't really know what the heck are server actions. But if you do know a bit about them and you want to proceed right away, that's totally okay. We can do that. Let's go over to lib and create a new file called actions.ts. Within there, as you know, you can immediately put a useServer directive at the top because all of these functions will be rendered on the server. So let's create our first server action by exporting it and declaring it as create idea, or you can call it create pitch. I think that makes a bit more sense. And let's set it equal to an async function that looks something like this. It'll accept a state as any and form as form data, as well as a pitch itself of a type string. Next, we also have to get info about the user who is submitting it. So let's get access to the active session by saying session is equal to await auth, and we need to import auth coming from next auth, or rather @ auth. If there is no session, we can just return an object with an error saying not signed in and a status of error. But you cannot just return objects like this. What you have to do is wrap them in json.parse, but first they have to be wrapped in json.stringify, like this. So just so we don't repeat this JSON parse, JSON stringify every time, let's actually create a new utility function. Right below the format date, we can say export function parse server action response, which will be of a type T. It'll take in a response of a type T as well, and it'll return json.parse, json.stringify, and then whatever response we pass into it. Now, this allows us to very easily call it and wrap any object we want to call directly with this new utility function, which we have created. Perfect. Now that we have covered the edge case, if our user is not authenticated, let's try to destructure all the values from the form by saying const title, description, category, and the link is equal to object.fromEntries, because it's all within an object. And then out of that, we can form array.from form, and we want to filter each property where key is not equal to pitch. So we only want to keep the pitch. Even though this might seem a bit complicated, it's the simplest way that I found it that works. We keep the title, description, category, and the link, and then we get the pitch from here. Finally, we also have to form a slug. And a slug is basically a unique identifier for that specific startup. You could generate it randomly, but I found this package called Slugify, which is very minimal, works very well. It just basically creates a meaningful slug for each post. So let's simply install it by running npm install Slugify, and we can say const slug is equal to Slugify, to which we can pass title as string, and we can provide additional options as lower is true and strict is true as well. Finally, now that we have all the info, such as the title, description, category, link, pitch, and then the slug as well, we can open up a try and catch block. Let's first handle the catch, where we're gonna console log the error, so we know that something went wrong, and we'll also return a parse server action response, where the error will be equal to JSON.stringify error, and the status will be set to error. And now for the try. We have everything needed to form a startup, so let's do that. Const startup is equal to an object that has a title, a description, a category, an image, which is gonna be a link, a slug of a type slug, and current value of slug. Make sure you put the underscore here for the type. We also have the author, so we have to connect the startup to the author, which is going to be underscore type is equal to reference, and the actual underscore ref will point to the session .ID, which is the ID of our author. And finally, the pitch, which is the markdown content. Let's see if Slugify has been imported properly. We have to say import Slugify from Slugify. There we go. And now we can write to Sanity client to create it by saying const result is equal to await write client dot create a document with an underscore type equal to startup, and we will simply spread out all of the startup values directly within this document, which we're creating within the object. Once we get the result, we can simply return a parse server action response where we spread out the result, error will be set to an empty string, and status will be set to success. There we go. So basically what we're doing is this. We are getting the necessary params, such as the form data and the pitch, which is also kind of like form data, but it's in a bit of a different format in Markdown, or a string in this case. Then we extract this session because we need to know who is the author of the startup. We check whether a session exists. We extract all the values from the form. We create a slug. We take all of those pieces of data, including the form data, the generated slug, the author, and the pitch itself, and we write to Sanity to actually create it in the database, and then we return it back. And this is called create pitch. So now we can go back to the startup form and we can uncomment our lines right here. But instead of create idea, I'll rename it to create pitch. And there we go. I don't think I even need to console log the result or the form values because we will see the toast, hopefully, and will be redirected to that startup details if the creation is successful. So let's go ahead and test it together. One more time, I will use the values from a real startup, SkillForge, which is an AI platform that uses AI to create learning paths. I'll grab in the image address, and the category can be set to something like EdTech. And finally, I will add the pitch details right here, and maybe make this SkillForge a bit larger. Let's see. There we go. This is looking good. So let's submit our pitch. It's submitting. And we got redirected to a 404, which is a good thing because for a second there, we saw your startup was created successfully. If you head over to localhost 3000/studio, you should be able to see SkillForge, or in your case, whatever title you used, indicating that the new startup has been successfully created from the form within our application. And it should already be visible on the homepage, but I'm wondering why it didn't redirect us to the details page of that startup. Well, it's because the URL says undefined. That means that this result ID was also undefined. So Why is that? Oh, the result has an underscore ID and not an ID. So this little fix should actually make it work. Great. But for now, let's manually navigate to homepage, and hopefully the new startup will appear right here. There we go. Keep in mind that it can take up to 60 seconds and you might need to clear the cache because it's pulling it from a CDN. But once it actually updates, you can see it here. You can go to its details page, and would you look at that? We have successfully created a real startup. And if you reload, you should be able to see that the number of views is 1, and it'll continue increasing. Great. I'll quickly head back over to Sanity Studio to delete the fake startups we had created with the fake user. So it was just Adrian, not a real user. So let's go ahead and delete these 3 documents because we now have the possibility to create new ones coming directly from the platform. There we go. And I'll delete this one as well. Finally, we can go under authors and you can delete this fake author that we have initially created because now we have real one authenticated with NextAuth using GitHub OAuth. And with that, we only have one startup. We have the ability to search for startups, SkillForge, there we go, or we can clear it, and we can now create startups. The majority of the functionality has already been implemented, but of course will continue until this actually feels like a real SaaS application that allows entrepreneurs to pitch their startups. So if you want to take a bit of a pause, now would be a perfect time to do so. You deserved it. Take a pause, go for a walk, or go to sleep if you're watching this late at night, and come back soon. Now that some of our app's major functionalities have been successfully implemented, it's time to make sure that hundreds of thousands of users that'll use them don't break them. And to make sure that doesn't happen, we'll use Sentry, the best application monitoring software, considered not bad by more than 4 million developers. Click the link in the description to follow along and see exactly what I'm seeing. Then create your account. Once you do, you'll be redirected either to the dashboard or to the onboarding. If you're already using Sanity to track your production level applications like I am, then you'll be on your dashboard. But in this case, we want to start from scratch. So in your URL, after your Sentry account name, simply type onboarding, which will open up this nice welcome to Sentry. Your code is probably broken, maybe not. Let's find out. Onboarding process. So let's go ahead and click install Sentry. Choose Next.js as your framework of choice, and let's configure it together. You'll have to copy this command and then head over to package.json. And in the same way that we have overrides for React and React DOM versions, I'll add another override for the version of Next.js. So simply say next $next. This will ensure that Sentry uses the same version of Next.js that we're using in our project. Now you can open up the terminal and paste the command we copied from Sanity right here. Feel free to change the name of the project. In our case, I'll use YC directory and press enter. Then press Y or enter. Say that we do have a Sentry account and you can choose this project right here and click continue. There we go. You can select the existing project and Sentry is being installed with npm. It'll then ask you whether you want to route Sentry requests in the browser through your Next.js server. In this case, I'll say no, as this can increase the server bill. It's not like we're gonna get charged or anything, as Sentry has a very generous, completely free tier, but it's nice how they said, we'll leave this option commented for later, just in case. I swear, Sentry has one of the best developer experiences out there. Do you want to enable React annotations? In this case, we can say, sure, yeah, do it. Do you want to enable tracing? Yep, why not? Sentry session replay? Yep, let's enable it. Do you want to create an example page? Yes, let's do it. Are you using CI/CD tool? Yeah, we'll be using Vercel later on, so let's say yes. And it's giving us a Sentry auth token, which you can copy now and press yes, continue. And there we go, successfully installed the Sentry Next.js SDK. You can validate your setup by restarting your dev environment and then visiting Sentry example page. So let's do just that. I'll head over to localhost 3000 /Sentry -example-page. And there we go. This is a page that was added to our application by Sentry, and for the first time ever, I'm gonna purposefully throw an error, just to make sure that Sentry is actually watching over us and alerting us about those errors. There we go, error has been thrown. And now at the bottom, you can see error received. So let's check out the error in our project dashboard. And there we go. It might take up to a minute for this error to appear, but there we go. Sentry example error for events priority high, and you can now get into it to see more details. First of all, you're getting additional information on where this error happened. Unhandled Sentry example API route error. And here's what's cool about it. Right now, sure, we could debug this error directly within our browser or dive into code and fix it. Super simple, right? But the problem occurs when a user breaks your application. And typically, no matter how much you test, users will always end up breaking it. So when they do break it, imagine how painful it is to ask them to open up the console and send out a screenshot of what they're seeing. Then they're not gonna copy and paste it, they're gonna take a photo of it with their phone, and debugging it will be super hard. So for that reason, Sentry simplifies tracking and resolution of those errors by giving you event highlights of how the error has happened. It happened in the development environment on this specific URL by doing this specific transaction on this specific browser. We can also see the line of code pointing to that error, and even the version of the operating system and the device that a user was using. It also gives some additional information such as the browser version, device architecture. I mean, this is pretty crazy stuff that's gonna allow you to debug your applications much more simply. And think about it, 100 users are gonna have 100 different devices and 100 different browsers. So being able to track, first of all, and then debug just makes your applications so much more scalable. You can also view the full trace right here and see exactly how the error has happened. And for some types of issues, like this Sentry example front-end error, you can actually check out the replay. There it is. So if I play it, first of all, you can see that all the characters are just asterisks because Sentry wants to protect the privacy of the user breaking your site. But you can still see what they were doing at the moment when they actually broke it. You can see exactly which pieces of UI they were clicking, with which headers, and on which URL. That allows you to go back to the code and fix it. Once you deploy a hotfix, just go ahead and click resolve. But of course, as the application grows and gets more users, as we can see right here, you'll get so many monitoring and tracking features provided to you by Sentry. Simply put, you can see which pages your users are breaking the most. This trace view is super useful. Of course, I don't even have to mention how useful the replays are. For example, let's check out the user that had most dead clicks, and let's set the time span to last 30 days. Let's check out this user, for example. This one is a bit crazy. Windows 10 Plus on the Opera browser. They were actually exploring the healthcare application that I created not that long ago. You can see exactly what they were doing, even though everything is completely blurred. So if the error has occurred, we would have known. We can see exactly which elements they were clicking, and we can also see what was happening in the console and the network tab of their browser. This makes the debugging process super simple. Along replays, there's also performance that allows you to track how quickly certain pages are loading for your users. So that way, you can figure out if some pages are loading slowly for whatever reason. You can also very quickly add a user feedback modal so that good users that don't break your application can report bugs on their own. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and add it together right now. I'll simply click Setup Now, and we just have to add this part to the Sentry client config. So let's copy this entire thing, head over to Sentry client config, and under integrations, along replay, we can also add this one here, Sentry.feedback integration. If you do that and go back to your application, check this out. A new report a bug floating button appeared at the bottom right. You can click it, enter your name and email, add a screenshot of the bug, and then say, the search isn't working for me. Just an example. And we can send the bug report in an instant. Then if you go back to the user feedback part of your dashboard and reload, you can immediately see a new ticket raised right here. The search isn't working for me, but it's not like you're only getting this text or a screenshot. You're getting much more, like the URL they were on, the replay that was happening before they actually sent the message, and all of the things that we have explored previously, such as browser and more information. And you can also immediately track this issue in Jira, GitHub, or any other platform. There's also some generic stats, so you can see how good your app is behaving. But in general, that is it. I don't want to bore you with a lot of other details. What I really wanted to say is that if you only add Sentry to your app, for which the setup literally took like 10 presses of the enter key and 3 minutes, already you're making your app so much more secure, less error prone, and more bug free. And if this is looking too good to be true, I mean, let's check out their pricing. For solo devs working on small projects, it is completely free. You're one user and you get all the error monitoring and tracing that we talked about. If you're gonna be the only dev using it, that's more than enough. So great job implementing Sentry and making our app that much more bug-free for our users to enjoy. I was planning to end this chapter here, but then I stopped recording and went to check out my email, and I just had to show this to you as well. While we were testing and our users were breaking the app, Sentry actually sent out an email alerting us about those issues in real time. So as soon as the error happened, we immediately got all the important information about the error, including the tags we talked about earlier, letting us know exactly what broke. So this is the type of thing that if you're running a serious SaaS application and there's a breaking bug, you want to be able to fix it as soon as possible. So it's good to know that this is offered too. Now, onto the next chapter. Next, let's create a user profile route. We can do that by opening the File Explorer, going to Root, and creating a new folder called User. Within it, create another folder called ID within the square brackets. This is a dynamic route, as you already know. And then create a new file called page.tsx. Run RAFCE inside of there. And as soon as you save it, you'll be able to click on your profile to actually navigate you to a profile page. There we go. So before we start with the UI, let's actually fetch the user details. Right here at the top, I will destructure the params of this page, and I'll specify the type. Params is going to be of a type params, which is a promise that contains an ID of a type string. Something like this. Then we can extract the ID from it by saying ID is equal to await params.id. And since we're using await, we have to add a sync right here. Next, we can get the session by saying const session is equal to await auth. And we also have to import auth from add/auth. Next, we can fetch the user by saying const user is await client.fetch. And this client, of course, is referring to a Sanity client. And we have author by GitHub ID query, to which we're going to pass the ID. Finally, we can check if a user doesn't exist, we can return a not found, which is going to navigate us to a 404. But as you can see here, we get a 404. This query isn't really going to cut it. It's getting the author by GitHub ID, which is called ID. But in here, we have to get a user by its own ID, by the author ID. So let's duplicate this entire query and let's just rename it a bit to getting the author by ID query. And we're going to refer to the underscore ID property. So the only thing we have to change is this underscore ID. Once you do that and replace this query and remove the one that we just imported, you'll see that now we'll still be on the same page without getting redirected to a 404. That means that we actually have the user and we can start creating the UI for the user details page. Let's start by turning everything into a React fragment, within which we will have a section. This section will have a class name equal to profile underscore container. And within this section, we'll have another div with a class name equal to profile underscore card. And within it, we'll have another div with a class name equal to profile underscore title, within which we will have an h3 element that'll have a class name equal to text-24-black, uppercase, and text-center, and ending it with line clamp 1 so it doesn't go into multiple rows. Within there, we can render the user.name. If I save this, we get this funky UI that says Adrian JS Mastery. For you, it's going to be something different. And if you're wondering how did we accomplish the styles to achieve this funky UI, you can just search for profile title or profile card and see exactly which styles are getting applied. Now let's go below the H3 and below the div and create a Next.js image. This image will have a source equal to user.image with an alt tag of user.name, a width of 220, a height of 220, and a class name of profile underscore image. And there we go. This one got pulled directly from my GitHub. This is kind of a face reveal. I'm standing right here next to my GitHub star at the GitHub Universe conference. Going below this image, let's render a p tag with a class name equal to text-30 extra bold, margin top of 7, and text-center. We can render at and then user ? username. Perfect. Right below this p tag, let's create another p tag with a class name of margin top of 1, text-center, and text-14-normal, within which we can render user ? bio. In this case, you should be able to see Next.js enthusiast and educator. For you, it's going to be something else. Let's go below this div and let's create another div with a class name equal to flex-1, flex, flex-call, gap of 5, and then extra large devices minus margin top of 5, within which we can render a p tag with a class name equal to text-30-bold, and there, if the session ? .id is equal to the ID of the currently logged in user, then we can say your, else we can say all, and then we can render the word startups. So currently I am on my profile and you'll be able to see your startups, but if we were on somebody else's profile, you would be able to see other startups, or rather all startups. Next, we can render a UL, which is an unordered list, with a class name of card underscore grid dash SM. And here we'll render a list of this user's startups. So user startups, and we'll do that very soon. But before we do, I want to explain that this is the perfect use case for PPR. All the user info you're seeing here, such as the name, username, bio, and profile photo, can be statically rendered for a longer time, but the user-created startups have to be dynamic. So here, we'll want to enable PPR. I'm going to go right at the top and say export const experimental underscore PPR is set to true. And I think you can slowly start seeing the exact use cases where PPR might come in handy. Whenever you have some static data, like we have explored the product details before, but recommended products, because they have to be recommended by some kind of dynamic algorithm, or maybe dynamic shipping, those things have to be dynamic. Same thing here, the new user startups have to be dynamic. So now let's create a new component in the components folder, and I'll call it user startups.tsx. I'll run RAFCE, and I'll import it right here. In this unordered list, I'll render user startups as a self-closing component. And you can see it appear right here. Now that we have this component, we also have to create a query that would allow us to fetch all the startups created specifically by that user. So let's copy one of the startup queries. It can be this one here, startups query, the first one we have ever created. Copy it, paste it right here below, rename it to startups by author query. Here, we were searching for a startup, but now we're going to remove this part all the way up to here. Yeah, we're going to remove this entire part. We're just going to keep the order. Okay, so we're going to say and author dot underscore ref is equal to $ID. So we're comparing it to the author we're searching for, and we will still order it created at descending. And then we want to return all of the information that we previously returned. Great. So now we can copy the name of that and go back, and we can import it right here by saying const startups is equal to await client, referring to Sanity client, dot fetch startups by query, and then we pass the ID of the author we're searching for. And how do we get the ID into this component? Well, we can pass it as a prop. ID is equal to ID. So we can very quickly get it right here through props by saying ID and specifying that this ID is of a type string. Since we're using await, we have to turn this into a synchronous function. And we get access to startups right here. Finally, we can return an empty React fragment where we're checking if startups.length is greater than 0, then we can return posts or startups.map, where we get each individual startup of a type startup card type, which we'll have to import. And for each one, we automatically return, just by using parentheses, a startup card. A startup card has to get a key, because we're mapping over it, of post dot $ID, and the post itself, which will be equal to startup. Now let's properly import the startup card type, which can come right here from startup card. Let's see, how did we call it in there? Startup type card. There we go. I fixed it. And here, I'm going to also refer to this as a startup dot underscore ID. And of course, we have to have the second part of the ternary, which is going to just render a p tag with a class name of no result, and it'll say no posts yet. Let's make sure that we properly indent it right here. There we go. I got it. Let's see, why is it complaining? I'll try to reload the server to see if that fixes it. Oh, but the error is still there. And you know what this might be? We missed one thing. We're doing a fetch right here, and we're using it within a PPR component, but we might need to wrap this newly created component into React Suspense, because this will take some time to load. So first, we need to show a fallback for it. So let's create a suspense component with a fallback equal to a p tag of loading, ... And now we can put user startups within it. And there we go, that fixed it, but it brought back the issue. So that means the issue is still somewhere here within user startups. Maybe we messed up the query while copying it. We're starting with this square bracket here, but we're never actually ending it. So let's end it here and save it. And there we go. We immediately get back our startup. And as you reload, you'll see that the top part loads immediately, but right here at the bottom, there's a quick loading that appears. And instead of simply showing the text that says loading, let's actually install a ShadCN skeleton component. A skeleton component is a grayed out rectangle that makes it appear like the entire div is loading. It looks so much better and makes the user wait a bit longer for it to load. So let's run npx ShadCN add latest add skeleton. Looks like we have already added it before. So let's head over to the startup card, and right at the bottom of it, we can say export const startup card skeleton, and we can have an instant return where we return a React fragment where we map over, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe different cards. By saying dot map, we get the first element and the index of that element, which is a number. And for each number, we return an li of key is equal to cn, which we have to import from utils, skeleton, and then the index. As a matter of fact, our numbers are actually indices. So we can just use the first parameter of the map as an index, and we can pass it here. That's going to be of a type number. And then within it, we can render a skeleton component coming from components UI skeleton with a class name equal to startup-card underscore skeleton. Now we're exporting it, and we can go back to our user details page, and we can use it right here instead of the loading. Startup card skeleton. It's going to look like this. So now if you reload, you should be able to see something that resembles a card appear before the card actually appears. Maybe if I go to inspect element and I go to network and I turn on slow 4G, maybe we can see the loading appear. No, that was still too fast. Well, what if I do Command-Shift-R, which is going to clear the cache as well? It's super fast, maybe even too fast to be able to see it. But there we go. For a second there, as I reloaded, or a millisecond, while the card was loading, you were able to see this one right here. Now, I can notice that we forgot to replace the avatar right here, because this one was created by the new avatar. So let's actually fix it by going over to Startup Card, and we'll search for where we show the avatar image right here. Instead of this source, we can rather render author ? Image. And now we can see a real image appear right here. That's much better. And we can render the author name as the alt tag for it. Perfect. This is great. So would you look at that? This is our second page where we used partial pre-rendering to show user details statically and then to dynamically render new startups that user has posted. Looking great. Now, one thing that I think we forgot to do at the start was to update the navigation bar to be a bit more mobile responsive. So if I go to mobile view, or rather collapse it like this, you'll see that it doesn't really fit all the way. Like it does on tablets, but not on smaller mobile devices. So let's quickly go back to the navbar and let's find the button where it says create right here. Let's give it a class name. On max SM, it'll be completely hidden. So you can see it will disappear. But now, below it, we can show a log out icon, which will have the exact opposite class. It'll be a size of 6, but on small devices, it'll be hidden, and it'll have a text red 500. So now we'll have a little logout icon. This doesn't go under create. This actually goes under logout. So let me put it right here below this logout button. And for it, we have to do the same thing as we have done above. Turn it into a span. So I'll copy this create and I'll just make it say logout. There we go. Below the create span, we can create a different icon. This time it'll be a badge plus icon. Once again, with a class name is equal to size of 6, and then small devices hidden. And finally, we can also replace the user avatar. Here where we show the user avatar name, instead of the full name, let's rather render the image. ShadCN has a perfect component for that. So let's run npx ShadCN latest add avatar. That'll allow us to remove this span, and instead of it, render avatar coming from components UI avatar with a class name equal to size is set to 10. Within it, we'll have an avatar image also coming from components UI avatar. It'll be self-closing and it'll have a source equal to session ?user ?image. Let's fix this class name spelling. And let's give this avatar an alt tag of session ?user ?name, or an empty string in case we don't have it. Same thing here, or an empty string. And below it, we can also render something known as an avatar fallback, coming from components UI avatar, which will allow us to render some kind of a fallback if the image is not there. We can say something like AV for avatar. Let's fix this class name right here. And there we go. we have a great looking avatar photo. And now if we expand it a bit, you can see now it's a bit different. Yes, the avatar is showing, but now it says create logout, and then smaller devices, we can see the icons. Great work coming this far into the video. In the next lesson, I'll show you how to add another great feature. Do you know about the website called Awards? The one that recognizes and promotes great websites? Well, I'll teach you how to implement a feature to our YC Directory app, similar to what Awards has. If you head over to Explore, you'll notice that there are many different categories, like honorable mentions, nominees, site of the day, site of the year, site of the month, and more. Well, these are, in simple words, playlists or some kind of categories of different startups or different designs, whatever it may be. So let's implement that into our app as well. Different categories of startups. We can do that by first creating a new schema in Sanity, schema types, and create a new file and call it playlist.ts. To create it, we can copy what we have in startup. There we go. And then paste it in the playlist and make the necessary adjustments, such as let's name it playlist, give it a name of playlist, a title of playlists, it'll be of a type document, and then we can define different fields. I'll delete a few of these as we only need 3 in this case. The first one will be a title, string, the title of the playlist. The second one will be a slug, and the third one will be a select, which is a type of array, like this. And it is going to be an array of different references. So we can say type is reference, and a reference to what, you may ask? Well, a reference to a type of startup. That's going to look something like this. So what do I mean by this? Well, each playlist will refer to multiple startups, and it'll have its own title, like Startups of the Day or Startups of the Year. So as soon as you do that, let's head over to index.ts and let's add playlists or playlist right here as the third type. Importing playlist from schema types playlist. If you save it, you can rerun your application and then head over to Sanity Studio. Once you're there, you can click this create button and create a new playlist. You can give it any name you like, such as best pitches or startup of the day, or something like editor picks, so startups that YC Directory admins have liked the most. We can generate a slug, and now you can select different startups you want to add to this playlist. And see how simple this is? You can just refer to different ones, like SkillForge in this case. And that's it. It'll automatically be saved. I'll pause the video for a second to create a few more startups, just so we have some more startups to choose from. And while I'm adding startups, you can also add some additional pitches too. There we go. I went ahead and added a few more startups. Now, typically it'll take 60 seconds for the cache to reload, or you can just hard reload it. And there we go. So now I can actually add a few more startups right here to editor picks. I'll add JS Mastery Pro, and I'll add EventSphere. And I'll click save at the bottom right. There we go. Our editor picks have been published. Now we have to write a query that fetches the playlists by the slug. So let's head over to queries and let's write one last query. Considering that we already wrote quite a couple, I'll actually provide this one to you in the README of this video. So you can just paste it here. The name will be playlist by slug query, and it'll search for documents of the _ type playlist where a slug exists. And then it's going to return everything, including all the necessary info for the startups within that playlist. Great. We want to show these editor picks on the startup details page, but you can really put it anywhere. You could also render it right here below the all startups. But for the time being, I'll render them below the details of a specific startup. So right here below. So let's copy the name of the query and let's head over to startup details. So that's going to be this page right here, which is under app, root, startup, ID. And the reason why we're doing this here is because I want to show you a special feature. So first things first, let's say const destructure select as editor posts or editor startups is equal to await client.fetch, where we pass in the query, and then we can also pass the slug that you're trying to fetch. In this case, I called it editor pix new. For you, most likely it's going to be editor pix. Once you do that, you can go below to where we left our to do right here, and you can check if editor posts $.length is greater than 0, then we want to render a div with a class name equal to max-w-4xl and margin x of auto. A p tag that'll have a class name equal to text-30-semibold, and it'll say editor pix. Right here, we can render a UL, an unordered list, with a class name of margin top of 7 and a card underscore grid of small, like this. Within it, we want to map over editor posts by saying .map, where we get each individual post, which is of a type startup type card, and we also get the index of a type number. And for each one, we want to simply return a startup card that's going to look something like this, with a key equal to index and a post equal to post. But make sure to first import the startup card, and we can just call index I. There we go. And immediately, you should be able to see however many posts you have chosen as editor picks. This is great, as now editors can go directly in Sanity Studio and choose their favorite startups. Now, all of this works and it is fine. We have a little issue, and that is that we have to be aware of two different data fetching patterns, parallel and sequential. When fetching data inside components, you need to be aware of those two patterns. So as you can see in sequential, one is happening after the other. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So it's trying to load both of the things first for the root layout, then for the second page, and then for the third page, one by one. But in parallel, it's actually loading one thing for all the pages, and then it's slowly loading the other, which takes much less time, as you can see here. In sequential, requests in a component tree are dependent on each other, which can lead to longer loading times. But in parallel, requests in a route are eagerly initiated and will load data at the same time, which reduces the total time it takes to load data. What we have done just now is sequential. We're first fetching the data about the post, and only then we're fetching the editor posts. So what does this mean? Well, this means that we first fetch the post data, and only after that is complete, then we fetch the editor picks. But the time to fetch both will increase, as it'll be the sum of both of these requests. This approach is great if the second request depends on the first one. But in this case, they're completely independent. So we can take advantage of these modern systems that are capable of handling multiple requests concurrently. So let me teach you how to implement parallel requests. It's going to look something like this. You'll say const and then do array destructuring and say this is equal to await promise.all. Promise.all allows you to pass two different calls, and then for each one, you get the result right here destructured. So the first call is going to be this one, client fetch startup by ID query. So let's copy it and let's add it as the first element in the array. The second one will be this one, client fetch playlist by slug. So let's copy it and add it as the second one. Great. And now we can just get the result of both of these at the start. We first get the post, and then for the second one, we can destructure this select editor posts. And now we can remove both of these two independent ones, as we have just one that does everything. This way, by using promise.all, the code makes two independent requests concurrently. And as a result, the total time is roughly equal to the duration of the longest request, not the sum of both. By doing this, your application's performance will increase, and load times will be even faster compared to making sequential requests. As you can see, it is super fast. I cannot even see something is loading. So now you know a bit about the difference between parallel and sequential rendering in Next.js. Understanding the basics can make a big difference. When you know how to fetch data in parallel, or use PPR to handle both dynamic and static content on the same page, you don't just make your website faster and better, you also grow from a beginner to a senior developer. You'll develop the decision-making skills every company wants, knowing which technology to use, when to use it, and most importantly, why. And that's why I've included many theoretical concepts, tips, tricks, and things I wish I knew when I was first learning Next.js in the Ultimate Next.js course. You'll dive deep into strategies like caching, revalidation, backend routes, serverless functions, edge runtimes, React server components, inner workings, handling parallel and sequential requests, and using the latest features from React 19 and Next 15. I've made sure to cover everything along with a build and deploy of a modern Stack Overflow clone, covering all of these features. So today, I'm publishing the Next.js 15 version of the Ultimate Next.js course, loved by over 4,100 developers who keep messaging me about how this course help them become the best Next.js developer in their team at work or get them freelance opportunities. And no, it's not just a few new lessons on Next 15, it's an entirely new course, fully re-recorded, packed with even more features such as Next Auth for authentication, deep dive into the new PPR strategy, improved database architecture, more secure server actions, testing using Playwright, email notifications, search engine optimization tips and tricks, and much more with a special dedicated Discord channel where we answered every single one of the answers from all 4,000 developers. See it for yourself. So don't delay your Next.js dreams and become the best Next.js developer by taking the Ultimate Next.js course. We have a super sale going on right now, which only happens about once a year. So visit jsmastery.pro/Next.js and join more than 4,000 developers on this journey. I hope I'll see you in the course. But for now, let's go ahead and finalize this application. I noticed that when creating a startup, we are issuing a toast notification. So let me show you how that looks like. If we go to the startup form, we're sending this success toast, specifically this one. But I noticed that sometimes it lacks the background. So let's try to initiate it by default by simply adding it right here at the top. And of course, closing it properly. If you reload, you can see it at the top. It's missing the background. So let's go to a toast component, which you can find by going to the components folder, and then UI, and then toast. I'm actually glad this happened because I can show you how we can further modify chassis and components. Let's head over to this line right here. Let's give it a BG white, text-slate-950, on dark mode, BG slate 950, and on dark mode, text slate 50. So we're just changing the text color and the background color. If I reload, this fixes it, and it's looking so much better. So now we can go back and remove this fake toast. And with that in mind, I believe our application is done. I can go ahead and test it a bit by checking the search. Yep, this works. Do we have a word that is shared amongst all of these? Well, I guess just the author is shared. So if I go for Adrian, yep, we can see that it finds all of them. If I go for event, no, nothing, but event sphere, yeah, this is good. What if I search for pro? Yep, that works. So search is working, everything is working, and this app is utilizing the latest and greatest of what React and Next.js have to offer. So the last step in every single JavaScript mastery video is deployment. So let's go ahead and deploy it to the internet together. To deploy it, you can head over to your GitHub and create a new repository. Call it something like YC directory. Either make it public or private, and click create. Then let's stop it from running and let's follow all of these steps. Git init, git add dot, git commit -m first commit, git branch -m main, git remote add origin. Oh, in this case, I already have one, so I'll rename it to origin 1, and git push u origin main. Once you do that, the code will be live on your repo, which means that we can head over to Vercel and create a new project out of this new repo that we just added. So let's go to import. Don't forget to add environment variables. So back in our code, we have our .env.local, copy all of these variables, and then paste them right here. And we also have the Sentry auth token as well. So let's copy it and add it as well, not to forget it. So let's click deploy. Now, when deploying big applications such as this one, especially after doing so many changes, it is highly likely and actually probable and expected that something will go wrong and that it won't be deployed on the first time. So we can make additional changes later. But that's not a problem. If it breaks, we'll fix it. So let's give it some time and I'll be right back. And after 2 minutes and 50 seconds, it broke. Thankfully, it is just a couple of TypeScript warnings, which is not a big deal. You can go ahead and fix those TypeScript issues in your project, or it's also totally okay to disable them for production builds. So that's exactly what we'll do in this case to get our project deployed. The only thing you have to do is say TypeScript, ignore build errors to true, and you can do that within next config. So let's head over to next config and let's add TypeScript, ignore build errors is set to true. Similarly, we can do the same thing for ESLint by saying ignore during builds is set to true. Now you can open up the terminal, run git add dot, git commit -m, update next config, and then run git push. As soon as you do that and go back to your Vercel dashboard, if you go to your project and go to deployments, you should be able to see that the update next config push is building. Fingers crossed. And there we go, the deployment succeeded. So if you go to project and click visit, you can see that our application loads, but there is a slight error, a client-side exception error specifically. So if you go to the console, you can see that Sanity is being blocked by the course policy. So let's head over to our project dashboard, go to API, go to course origin, and add a course origin for our newly deployed URL. We can do that by copying the URL from the app. And let's allow credentials and click save. Now, if you go back and reload, it all works. You might have thought that we broke something else, but no, we just had to allow it. Another thing which we'll have to allow is GitHub OAuth. Remember the redirect URI? You'll have to take the URL of the current application, head back to the OAuth settings for this app, and then update the homepage URL, as well as this URL right here. https ycdirectory.vercel.app or whatever your URL is, and then leave the rest the same. Click Update Application, go back, reload, and click Login one more time. And would you look at that? It logged us in automatically. So to finish this great video off, let's create one final startup. Actually, the startup title will be the YC directory itself. We're so proud of it, so let's say that this is a directory of great startup pitches created by the community. Category is gonna be something like business. We can take some kind of an image from maybe YC Combinator. So I'll just grab the image address and paste it. And we can say something like, no pitch needed right here. This app speaks for itself. And let's submit the pitch. Oh, it looks like the image wasn't valid and it cleared our form. That's actually one update that I would like you to make. play with the new React hook that we used to submit the form and try to repopulate the fields if the submission fails. But no worries, I've took another image and I'll say YC directory. Hopefully this time it works. And I'll click submit. There we go, your startup pitch has been submitted. We can see it right here, which means that all of our app's functionalities are working. And it still didn't appear on the homepage because these results are cached and it can take up to 60 seconds to appear right here. Beautiful. This was such a wonderful build in which we explored the latest and greatest of what React, Next.js, and Sanity have to offer. And if you came to the end of this video and you still didn't take the Ultimate Next.js course, I really think you're gonna love it, considering that you watched all the way until the end of this amazing crash course. As I already told you, in this Ultimate course, we dive much deeper into the intricacies of how Next.js truly works under the hood. We optimize performance to this, and we do a lot of deep dives to truly understand how things work behind the scenes, as well as build an app that is much more complex than the app you've built in this video. So, considering that you're watching here after a couple of hours of content and you're still here, I really think it's a good fit for you. I'll leave the link down in the description. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.